So now let's look at how we can implement Spring Security in a particular application. Right? And before we start implementing Spring Security, I've just created a demo application. We've called it Security Demo, right? And I've just added two basic dependencies here, the Spring Boot Starter Web, which we need in order to create a REST endpoint, right? And then just Lombok so that we can easily create objects of a particular class, right? And if you see, this is just plain old application startup class. I've created a controller here called student controller, right? And I've created a REST endpoint here that says students slash student ID, right? And it takes a student ID in the path variable, right? And we've just created a static list of students. And once a student ID is passed in the path variable, we just search for that list of students here, right? Search the student ID in that list of students, and we return the student back in the response, the student object, if it's found. And if it's not found, just for the simplicity, as of now, I've just returned, or I'm just throwing an illegal state exception, right? Now, let's try to run this application. Like I said, there is no Spring Security in this application right now, right? It's just a simple REST endpoint. So I'll quickly go to Chrome and we will just hit this REST endpoint once again, just to be sure that, right? So as you can see, I've just passed students slash one, and the REST endpoint was able to match this one to the student ID of Harish, and that's what we got in the response here, right? So this was simple. Now what we're going to do next is we're going to add Spring Security in the class path, right? Yeah, as a dependency. So we need to just go to the POM file and add the dependency for Spring Boot Starter Security, right? So that's it, and we will build it. Now that it is built, let's restart the service and see what happens. Right, so the application is started. Now let's go and hit this endpoint again, and you see what happens, right? So immediately after adding the dependency, the Spring Boot kicks in and stops any requests coming in without a proper security mechanism, without a username and password. So it redirects us to something called a form-based authentication, right? A screen where I'm allowed to enter username and password. So now what username and password do I enter here, right? So by default, Spring has given the username as user, right? And the password is what you see on the console. So see, they've given us a password as well. Now by default, this is not a default password. They'll generate a password and every time you restart the service, right? So I'll just copy this, right? And I'll paste it here, right? And I'll click on sign in. So now you see the same URL is accessible again, right? So this just by adding the Spring Security dependency, we were able to add some amount of security to our application.